All right, welcome on into the KSL Sports front page. It's a special edition here on Facebook Live, and it's always brought to you by our friends at University Federal Credit Union. A little bit of breaking news to report here on KSLSports.com. Real quick, we're going to go around the horn. Myself, I'm Mitch Harper, BYU insider for KSL Sports. Below me here on this four boxes we got, so I'll just point down. Trevor Allen, Utah insider. Matt Glade, host of the Scotsman podcast, Utah State podcast, and also producer for KSL 5 Sports Beat. And then Matt Baiamonte, my co-host here on Cougar Sports Saturday on KSL News Radio. So, guys, the big news today, Devonta'e Henry-Cole, former Utah Utes running back, signed to play for BYU this fall, is now expected to play for the Utah State Aggies. And we got a story up on it here on KSLSports.com. HenryCole, a talented football player, headed into his senior season as a graduate transfer, is going to the Aggies. Well, for BYU, this is a pretty big loss, as he was going to be a guy that was going to contend to be the starting running back this season for BYU. But a little bit of perspective on his background, Trevor, at Utah. What type of player is Devonta'e Henry-Cole here that the Aggies are potentially getting?
You know, he's typically a guy who just wants his shot at being the number one running back. You know, at Utah, spent 3 years there, and you know the big issue is that he was behind a guy named Zach Moss, who went on to be the leading rusher in Utah history. But you know, there was 1 year in 2018 where Zach Moss, along with Tyler Huntley, missed the last 5 games of the season due to injury, and that could have been Devontae's time to shine, but also had a guy named Armand Shine, who had a really good last 5 games for Utah. And so he was always just stuck in the middle. He was always there vying for that number 2 spot, but sometimes would be, the third guy on the depth chart for the Utes. But, you know, just an overall hard worker. He's a guy who just wants to have his opportunity to shine. In 2018, in 2017, he rushed for 279 yards. And then in 2019, rushed for 188 yards, had 4 touchdowns in those 2 seasons total. So he's just a guy who just wants his fair shake, and that was one of the reasons. I mean, he saw the writing on the wall at Utah. Didn't think it didn't look like he was going to get that starting running back job, even though he was going to be the guy coming back as a senior for the Utes. But there was Devin Brumfield and Jordan Wilmore, who have both emerged to be the starting running backs for Utah. And so that was when he chose to go to BYU. Was, you know, he definitely saw a chance there to be the guy at running back.
For those of you joining us now here on the program, this is the KSL Sports front page here on Facebook Live. We always do this on Monday, Wednesdays, and Fridays. Today's a special edition, this one, because Devonta'e Henry-Cole, as you see here on the screen to my right, or as to your right, Devonta'e Henry-Cole, signee to go to BYU, is headed to Utah State. Now, he's a grad transfer, so it's technically a letter of intent. I put that on my tweet. I had to correct that. That's been updated in the report here on the website. But, you know, with graduate transfers, they're not attached to a letter of intent like, say, Caleb in basketball going from Utah to BYU. It's more of a financial aid agreement, and Devonta'e Henry-Cole never enrolled at BYU. So now he's headed up to the Cache Valley to play for the Utah State Aggies, and we bring in Matt Glade, host of the Scotsman podcast, and also producer for KSL 5 TV's Sports Beat. Matt, Utah State getting Devonta'e Henry-Cole, pairing him up with Jalen Warren. This might be one of the best backfields the Mountain West Conference has in 2020.
And it was absolutely something that Utah State needed. Outside of Jalen Warren, who was a tremendous back for Utah State last season, unfortunately, the problem with Jalen Warren is he has a hard time staying healthy. When he's in the game, he is devastating. But they needed somebody who could come in and take reps, who could do 10 to 15 carries per game. Especially with Gerald Bright graduating this offseason, the Aggies didn't have another running back on the roster who had a carry last season. They have a lot of youth, a lot of guys that just don't have any experience. This was a big get for Utah State to get someone like Devonta'e Henry-Cole, who has experience at a Pac-12 school, who can come in the running back room and add depth to a running back squad that desperately needed it. They got Jason Shelley, his old teammate, which probably didn't hurt Utah State's cause when trying to get Devonta'e Henry-Cole up there, so getting him up there with best friend. But that was something the Aggies desperately needed. They lost a lot of experience this past off. The last 2 years, all across the board, especially on offense. They've lost a lot of experience. And so having two guys come in who have these kind of reps in college football was very important to the Aggies.
Now, it hasn't been officially announced yet. Utah State has yet to announce the addition of Devonta'e.
Right.
Also, so things can still happen. But again, we're reporting here on KSLSports.com.
Mm-hmm.
It's expected to head up to the Cache Valley and play for Utah State. And again, if you're watching this on our Facebook Live, comment, interact with us, share your comments. We can read it and ask questions as well. We can get at those and see those questions live and in real time. Matt Glade, my co-host here on Cougar Sports Saturday on KSL News Radio on Saturdays. Matt, for BYU, what impact does this make, in your opinion, on the Cougars in 2020? And what do you think went into the decision for DHC to leave potentially in your mind?
It's a huge impact for BYU. I think that he was going to step in and be the starting running back from day one and be someone that you could play on all three downs. BYU does not currently have a running back on the roster that I think is a 3-down running back. You look at Lapini Katoa, who's likely going to be the starting running back now. And that was going to be a competition, but I just think DHC would have won out. He's going to be asked to do stuff that hopefully he can fill a role that BYU needs. There's not a lot of depth at that position right now. There is some talent, but there's some unproven commodities. One guy that I think is now going to be thrust into a much larger role is Jackson McChesney. And then Sione Finau, depending on how he recovers from the ACL injury last year, that's probably your 1, 2, 3 at running back. In terms of him leaving, I got to believe this was two reasons. Number one, I think the transfer of Jason Shelley plays a big role. They're the former teammates, good friends. Number two, I got to imagine the uncertainty with what BYU's schedule is looking like will play into that too. With the Mountain West, they're still waiting and seeing, but they have the conference-only card in their back pocket that BYU doesn't have.
Trent Ladle, wrote a comment here on our Facebook Live. Was DHC even accepted into a graduate program at BYU? Could this be part of the story? Trent, I've been told that he was accepted to a grad program and that he was accepted but never enrolled. So that's why he is free to go. Now, the financial aspect, whether or not he accepted financial aid when it comes to being in the graduate program, I'm not sure how that gets all sorted out. But again, he's expected to go to Utah State and be teamed up in the backfield with Jason Shelley. And I do think too, guys, and I'm curious to get your thoughts on this, Trevor, the Utah game seemed to have a huge presence potentially in DHC's decision. Because remember, when he announced that he was going to be transferring from Utah as a grad transfer, BYU and Utah State were instantly thought of as landing spots for DHC. But I think kind of the trump card for BYU was, well, one, he was recently converted to the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, but two, the chance to play his old team in week 1 against Utah. That gets taken away when the Pac-12 goes to a conference-only schedule. How much of an impact do you think that had, Trevor, on DHC maybe heading up to Logan now to play with Gary Anderson?
I honestly think that was just the start of it. I think that once the Pac-12 announced to go to a conference-only schedule, that was just the beginning of it. And then seeing of what Jason Shelley, him leaving to go to Utah State, and then seeing a need there. But also something I noted on Twitter, Mitch, and Matt Glade could definitely comment on this is that one of the things that Gary Anderson has already done in his second stint up at Utah State is that he's taken Utah transfers and they have thrived up in Logan. You look at Caleb Rep, Siosi Mariner, just to name a few, and guys that could come in and already have the major impact on that program and playing right away, especially with Caleb Rep and Siosi Mariner being graduate transfers. But I mean, both of them had really big years for the Aggies. I mean, it didn't hurt to have a guy like Jordan Love throwing them the football. But I think a lot of that was I think that was just the start of it was when the Pac-12 went to conference only. And then after that, I think of what Jason Shelley, when he announced to go to Utah State, that was just the end of it right there.
To get a full roundup of all this, go to KSLSports.com. Make sure to like us on all of our social medias, Facebook, Twitter, at KSL Sports, obviously here on Facebook and YouTube. Give us a like, subscribe. We're always creating great content here. And Matt Glade, I want to ask you, I'm curious, if a football season happens, and there's still a lot of unknowns as to whether or not that's going to happen, the Mountain West Conference, Utah State looks like maybe before this move that just a touch trending down in the post-Jordan Love era. You get Jason Shelley, yes. Henry Colombi goes into the transfer portal. But I feel like getting DHC creates an opportunity where, hey, Utah State can maybe surprise some folks and have a little bit of a quicker turnaround coming back from a 7-6 season a year ago.
It definitely adds some stability to the roster where everything is changing so much, and especially in a season where they're going to depend on a lot of youth and not as much experience coming in, and where they don't have the camps to practice and get those guys the reps that they need. Bringing in a guy like Devonta'e Henry-Cole is key to get that. And maybe they don't have as bad of a season bringing in a couple guys like this as you would expect, getting a little bit on the offense. But I mean, there are still a lot of unknowns. You got Bodie Reeder coming in, so you've got an entirely new offense. And we're yet to see what that looks like, and trying to implement that during a pandemic is not exactly an easy thing to do. So getting guys that have experience in a college system, albeit it will be different from what they run, it's an important thing. And so I think you're right. I mean, instead of the downward trend maybe that they would experience, this will add a little bit more stability to their season.
I'm glad you bring up the pandemic too, because I think we'd be remiss if we didn't mention that as an element here, because this has all been just so foreign this off season. You're not having the typical opportunities to just work out and be close and have this kind of bonding like a lot of quarterbacks, running backs, wide receivers usually have. It's been a social distance. Mm-hmm. There's been voluntary workouts, yes, but when you're talking about a newcomer, a guy that has yet to enroll, that makes it a little bit trickier to kind of acclimate yourself. And when you have maybe a comfort level already with a guy like Jason Shelley in that backfield, and then, oh, by the way, there's supposedly his girlfriend is a student at Utah State, maybe that just brings a little bit more comfort and easiness when you're heading in to your final college football season. Last thing, guys, before we go, Matt Glade, I want to get your thoughts. Utah State, BYU, October 2nd. It's the first game right now on the schedule for BYU, but I got to say this adds another dimension to a matchup and a series that has really blossomed into a full-fledged rivalry once again over the last 5 to 7 years. It's going to be must-see TV if this season actually happens. BYU and Utah State, October 2nd, should be a fun one to watch in Provo.
Yeah, and I got to imagine the BYU players and coaching staff, this game just became a little more important when someone denies you this circumstances, you don't hear about this very often. I mean, it's almost August, and we got a player switching universities. He's had the playbook. He's been inside the program now, as you mentioned with the pandemic, not quite to the level that you normally would, but still those things happen. And so I got to imagine there's players and coaches that are looking at this game now, if it happens, saying, hey, we got to show this dude that he made a mistake. And I think the pandemic just plays such a big role in this, because if BYU's schedule that was going to be played was still there, I don't think this happens. Regardless of the friendship with Jason Shelley, you look at an opportunity to be playing, as you mentioned, his former school, Utah, Michigan State, all these Power 5 teams. I don't think you can turn that down to go play a Utah State schedule. But with the uncertainty of BYU, and maybe they only play the independents, then you look at a Utah State schedule and say, hey, that might be better than what BYU has. But that game certainly, I think, will take on just another dimension in October.
Well, that's going to do it for this special edition Facebook Live here on KSL Sports Facebook. You can get at us in many different ways on KSLSports.com, KSL5 TV, KSL News Radio. All of us host podcasts. You can watch Sports Beat tonight. Matt, what time can we watch Sports Beat? I'm sure you guys are going to be talking about this tonight.
You can watch it at 10 o'clock on Channel 5.
All right, good stuff. And then follow Trevor Allen, Crimson Corner Podcast, Matt Glade, Cougar Sports Saturday, and the Scotsman Podcast, and Cougar Tracks as well. I'll have a special edition Cougar Tracks up discussing DHC, and also Tom Homo's comments about BYU football schedule potentially in 2020. So thanks again for checking us out. We'll talk to you soon here on the KSL Sports Facebook Live, brought to you by University Federal Credit Union.